Okay, if you'll recall, we left Boswell and Johnson on the road to Oxford. Um, Boswell is visiting England for some reason. I don't know why exactly. And Johnson will be soon going to Italy. So before they go, he goes to Italy. They're taking a little jaunt around England. I look like a ghost. Oh well. Gwyn was a fine, lively, rattling fellow. Dr. Johnson kept him in subjection, but with a kindly authority. The spirit of the artist, however, rose against what he thought a Gothic attack, and he made a brisk defense. What, sir, will you allow no value to beauty in architecture or in stationery? Stationery? Why should we allow it then in writing? Why do you take the trouble to give us so many fine allusions and bright images and elegant phrases? You might convey all your instruction without these ornaments. Johnson smiled with complacency, but said, Why, sir, all these ornaments are useful because they attain an easier reception for truth. But a building is not at all more convenient for being decorated with superfluous carved work. I think I could argue with Johnson there. Gwyn at last was lucky enough to make one reply to Dr. Johnson, which he allowed to be excellent. Johnson censured him for taking down a church which might have stood many years, and building a new one on a different place, for no other reason but that there might be a direct road to a new bridge. And his expression was, You are taking a church out of the way that the people may go in a straight line to the bridge. No, sir, said Gwyn. I am putting the church in the way that the people may not go out of the way. Johnson, with a hearty, loud laugh of approbation, Ha ha ha! Speak no more. Rest your colloquial fame upon this. Upon our arrival at Oxford, Dr. Johnson and I went directly to University College, but were disappointed on finding that one of the fellows, his friend Mr. Scott, who accompanied him from Newcastle to Edinburgh, was gone to the country. Should have called ahead. We put up at the Angel Inn and passed the evening by ourselves in easy and familiar conversation. Talking of constitutional melancholy, Johnson observed, A man so afflicted, sir, must divert distressing thoughts and not combat with them. I said, May not he think them down, sir? Johnson said, No, sir. To attempt to think them down is madness. He should have a lamp constantly burning in his bedchamber during the night, and if wakefully disturbed, take a book and read and compose himself to rest. To have the management of the mind is a great art, and it may be attained in a considerable degree by experience and habitual exercise. I said, Should not he provide amusements for himself? Would it not, for instance, be right for him to take a course of chemistry? Johnson said, Let him take a course of chemistry, or a course of rope dancing, or a course of anything to which he is inclined at the time. Let him contrive to have as many retreats for his mind as he can, as many things to which it can fly from itself. Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy is a valuable work. It is perhaps overloaded with quotation, but there is great spirit and great power in what Burton says when he writes from his own mind. Next morning we visited Mr. Wetherell, master of University College, with whom Dr. Johnson conferred on the most advantageous mode of disposing of the books printed at the Clarendon Press, on which subject his letter had been inserted in a former page. I think you'll recall that from last time or the time before that, if you've been paying attention. I often had occasion to remark, Johnson loved business, loved to have his wisdom actually operate on real life. Dr. Wetherell and I talked of him without reserve in his own presence. Wetherell said, I would have given him 100 guineas if he would have written a preface to his political tracts by way of a discourse on the British Constitution. I said, Dr. Johnson, though in his writings and upon all occasions a great friend to the Constitution, both in church and state, has never written expressly in support of either. There is really a claim upon him for both. I am sure he could give a volume of no great bulk upon each, which would comprise all the substance, and with his spirit would effectually maintain them. He should erect a fort on the confines of each. I could perceive that he was displeased with this dialogue. He burst out, "Why should I be always writing?" I hoped he was conscious that the debt was just and meant to discharge it, though he disliked being dunned. We then went to Pembroke College and waited on his old friend Dr. Adams, the master of it, whom I found to be a most polite, pleasing, communicative man. Before his advancement to the headship of his college, I had intended to go and visit him at Shrewsbury, where he was rector of St. Chad's, in order to get from him with particulars he could recollect of Johnson's academical life. He now obligingly gave me part of that authentic information which, with what I afterwards owed to his kindness, will be found incorporated in its proper place in this work. Dr. Adams had distinguished himself by an able answer to David Hume's essay on miracles. He told me he had once dined in company with Hume in London, that Hume shook hands with him and said, "You have treated me much better than I deserve," and that they'd exchanged visits. I took the liberty to object to treating an infidel writer with smooth civility. Where there is a controversy concerning a passage in a classical author, or concerning a question of antiquities, or any other subject in which human happiness is not deeply interested, a man may treat his antagonist with politeness and even respect. But where the controversy is concerning the truth of religion, it is of such vast importance to him who maintains it to obtain the victory that the person of an opponent ought not to be spared. If a man firmly believes that religion is an invaluable treasure, he will consider a writer who endeavors to deprive mankind of it as a robber. He will look upon him as a odious, though the infidel might think himself in the right. A robber who reasons on the gang as the gang do in the Beggar's Opera, who calls themselves practical philosophers, and may have as much sincerity as pernicious speculative philosophers, is not the less an object of just indignation. An abandoned profligate may think that it is not wrong to debauch his wife, but shall I therefore not detest him? And if I catch him in making an attempt, shall I retreat him with politeness? No, I will kick him downstairs, or run him through the body. That is, if I really love my wife, or have a true rational notion of honor. An infidel, then, shall not be treated handsomely by a Christian, merely because he endeavors to rob with ingenuity. I do declare, however, that I am exceedingly unwilling to be provoked to anger, and could I be persuaded the truth would not suffer from a cool moderation in its defenders, I should wish to preserve good humor, at least in every controversy. Nor, indeed, do I see why a man should lose his temper while he does all he can to refute an opponent. Is this the life of Boswell or the life of Johnson here? Come on. This is all Boswell talking. I think ridicule may be fairly used against an infidel. For instance, if he is an ugly fellow, it says here in a footnote, probably Gibbon he's talking about here, and yet absurdly vain of his person, we may contrast his appearance with Cicero's beautiful image of virtue, should she be seen. Johnson coincided with me and said, "When a man voluntarily engages in an important controversy, he is to do all he can to lessen his antagonist, because authority from personal respect has much weight with most people and often more than reasoning. If my antagonist writes bad language, though they may not be essential to the question, I will attack him for his bad language." Adams said, "You would not jostle a chimney sweeper." Johnson said, "Yes, sir, if I were necessary to jostle him down." Dr. Adams told us that in some of the colleges of Oxford, the fellows had excluded the students from social intercourse with them in the common room. Johnson said, "They are in the right, sir, for there can be no real conversation, no fair exertion of mind amongst them, if the young men are by. for a man who has a character does not choose to stake it in their presence. Boswell, I said, but, sirs, may there not be very good conversation without a contest for superiority? Johnson answered, no animated conversation, sir, for it cannot be but one or other will come off superior. I do not mean that the victor must have the better of the argument, for he may take the weak side, but his superiority of parts and knowledge will necessarily appear, and he to whom he thus shows himself superior is lessened in the eyes of the young men. You know, it was said, malum cum scalagro errare quam cum clavio recte sapare. Better to err with Scaliger than to be right with Clavio. In the same manner, take Bentley's and Jason Denore's comments upon Horace. You will admire Bentley more when wrong than Jason when right. I don't know, I haven't looked at them. We walked with Dr. Adams into the master's garden and into the common rooms, Johnson said, after a reverie of meditation. Aye, here I used to play at draughts with Phil, Jones, and Fludyer. Jones loved beer and did not get very forward in the church. Fludyer turned out a scoundrel, a Whig, and said he was ashamed of having been bred at Oxford. He had a living at Putney, and got under the eye of some retainers to the court at the time, and so became a violent Whig. But he had been a scoundrel all along, to be sure. I said, was he a scoundrel, sir, in any other way than that of being a political scoundrel? Did he cheat at draughts? Johnson said, sir, we never played for money. He then carried me to visit Dr. Bentham, canon of Christ Church and divinity professor, with whom learned and lively conversation we were much pleased. He gave us an invitation to dinner, which Dr. Johnson told me was a high honor. Sir, it is a great thing to dine with the canons of Christ Church. We could not accept his invitation, as we were engaged to dine at University College. We had an excellent dinner there, with the Mastered Fellows, it being St. Cuthbert's Day, which is kept by them as a festival, as he was a saint of Durham, with which this college is much connected. We drank tea with Dr. Horn, late president of Magdalen College, and Bishop of Norwich, of whose abilities, in different respects, the public has had eminent proofs, and the esteem annexed to whose character was increased by knowing him personally. He had talked of publishing an edition of Walton's Lives, but had laid aside that design upon Dr. Johnson telling him, from mistake, that Lord Hailes intended to do it. I had wished to negotiate between Lord Hailes and him, that one or the other should perform so good a work. Johnson said, in order to do it, well, it will be necessary to collect all the editions of Walton's Lives. By way of adapting the book to the taste of the present age, they have, in the later editions, left out a vision which he related to Dr. Don had, but it should be restored. There should be a critical catalogue given of the works of the different persons whose lives were written by Walton, and therefore their works must be carefully read by the editor. We then went to Trinity College, where he introduced me to Mr. Thomas Wharton, with whom we passed a part of the evening. We talked of biography. Johnson said, it is really well executed. They only who... That's funny reading this. They only who live with man can write his life with any genuine exactness and discrimination. Let me rephrase that. They only who live with a man can write his life with any genuine exactness and discrimination. And few people who have lived with a man know what to remark about him. The chaplain of a late bishop, it says here in a footnote, this is Reverend John Darby and Bishop Zachary Pierce, whom I was to assist in writing some memoirs of his lordship, could tell me scarcely anything. There's a footnote here from Boswell. It has been mentioned to me by an accurate English friend. It says here in another footnote underneath that, the phrase was objected to as a Scotticism by G in the Monthly Review. that Dr. Johnson could never have used the phrase almost nothing, as not being English, and therefore I have put another in its place. At the same time, I am not quite convinced it is not good English, for the best writers use the phrase little or nothing, i.e. almost so little as to be nothing. So here, in case you're confused, Johnson said up here earlier, scarcely anything. And I guess in the original version, Boswell had almost nothing, but then somebody complained that that was a Scottishism. The British person would never say almost nothing. I don't know. Do they say almost nothing now? Anyway, I said Mr. Robert Dodsley's life should be written, as he had been so much connected with the wits of his time, and by his literary merit had raised himself from the station of a footman. Mr. Warden said he had published a little volume under the title of The Muse in Livery. Johnson said, I doubt whether Dodsley's brother would thank a man who should write his life. Yet Dodsley himself was not unwilling that his original low condition should be recollected. When Lord Lyttelton's Dialogues of the Dead came out, one of which is between Apicus, an ancient epicure, and Dartineuf, a modern epicure, Dodsley said to me, I knew Dartineuf well, for I was once his footman. Biography led us to speak of Dr. John Campbell, who had written a considerable part of the Biographia Britannica. Johnson, though he valued him highly, was of opinion that there was not so much in his great work. A political survey of Great Britain, as the world had been taught to expect, and had said to me that he believes Campbell's disappointment on account of the bad success of that work had killed him. He this evening observed of it that work was his death. Mr. Warden, not adverting to his meaning, answered, I believe so, from the great attention he bestowed on it. Johnson said, Nay, sir, he died of want of affection, if he died at all, by that book. Footnote here from Boswell, yet surely it is a very useful work, and of wonderful research and labor for one man to have executed. We talked of a work much in vogue at the time, written in a very mellifluous style, but which, under pretext of another subject, contained much artful infidelity. I said it was not fair to attack us thus unexpectedly. He should have warned us of our danger before we entered his garden of flowery eloquence, by advertising, Spring guns and men traps set here. The author had been an Oxonian, and was remembered there for having turned Papist. I observed that as he had changed several times from the Church of England to the Church of Rome, from the Church of Rome to Infidelity, I did not despair yet of seeing him a Methodist preacher. Johnson, laughing, said, It is said that his range has been more extensive, and that he has once been Mahometan. However, now that he has published his Infidelity, he will probably persist in it. I said, I am not quite sure of that, sir. It says here in a footnote that they're talking about Gibbon. Well, I believe let me check this. I believe they said was ugly in the last page, didn't they? Yeah, they're talking about how ugly he was earlier. I mentioned Sir Richard Steele having published his Christian Hero, with the avowed purpose of obliging himself to lead a religious life, yet that his conduct was by no means strictly suitable. Johnson said, Steele, I believe, practiced the lighter vices. Mr. Watherm, being engaged, could not sup with us at our inn. We had therefore another evening by ourselves. I asked Johnson whether a man's being forward in making himself known to eminent people and seeing as much of life, and getting as much information as he could in every way, was not yet lessening himself by his forwardness. Johnson said, No, sir, a man always makes himself greater as he increases his knowledge. And a footnote tells us that, of course, when Boswell says about a man here, he's talking about himself. So he's talking about Boswell. Well, we'll continue this Oxford porn, your British school porn, another day. Till next time, bye from Boswell.